Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the BINA webinar, live from here at BINA. So just a quick summary of what we discussed on Monday, and then we'll continue on this topic. So on Monday we discussed the reason why prison, why incarcerating somebody in jail is not a punishment which is listed in the Torah as one of the punishments given to somebody who sinned. And the reason is because the whole purpose of punishment is to cleanse a person's soul from any negativity which he or she might have brought upon their soul. And therefore, in order to properly be able to use one's powers and ability to serve God, one needs to go through a cleansing process. And once that cleansing process is done, then they can go and serve God properly for the rest of their life, hopefully. That includes punishments like financial loss, paying for something you've stole. In some cases, a person will be obligated to pay double. There'll be various fines because of various damages, etc., etc. Or punishments like lashes, getting whipped, as we discussed at length on Monday, exactly the process that the Jewish court would need to go through in order to do that. Of course, they would assess the person medically to see how much that person could actually take and how much they can survive through. And therefore, there wouldn't be any lasting damage. It would be painful, of course, and serve as a punishment. But again, the purpose was to cleanse the person. Or the other extreme, somebody who has done something so bad that their mission has now been revoked. They cannot remain alive on this earth, and therefore Torah would say that that person would actually need to be sentenced to death. However, to keep somebody alive, which by definition means that they have a purpose, and not allow them to fulfill that purpose, there's no room for that in Torah. It's a contradiction in terms. To keep somebody alive, to have a purpose, but not to allow them to fulfill that purpose, that would be the ultimate breaking, the ultimate contradiction to human rights. The basic human right that a human being has is to fulfill their fullest potential. And therefore, prison is not a punishment given in the Torah. Now, what I wanted to do today is have a look at actually where prison is mentioned in the Torah, and show you how it's not as a punishment, or even in the cases where it seems to be, it's not at all the type of prisons that we have today. So whenever prison is mentioned in the Torah, it's either done by a non-Jewish king, or contradiction, or done in contradiction to Jewish law, not according to Jewish law, or done as a temporary holding place till that person is sentenced, but never as a punishment in itself. So the first example where prison is written in the Torah is where Yosef, being in Egypt, was accused of attempting to rape his master's wife and therefore was put in jail. Obviously the story wasn't true, it was the other way around. Potiphar's wife actually tried to seduce Yosef, but in the end he refused, and therefore she accused him, and he landed up in jail. And that's the first place where the whole concept of jail is actually mentioned, obviously done in a wicked country of Egypt by a wicked king. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Jeremiah the prophet, was put into jail by a Jewish king. However, that was also a bad thing. The reason why he was put into jail, sometimes the easiest way to deal with painful truths is to silence that person who's saying them. Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Jeremiah the prophet, was saying prophecy about the future exile, telling the Jewish people that they better mend their ways, otherwise God will destroy the temple. The Jews didn't like that, the king didn't like that, and therefore put him into jail. Obviously the temple ended up being destroyed. So again, it is mentioned in Torah, but it's not encouraged at all. It was done contrary to Jewish law. Two places in the Chumash, while the Jewish people were in the desert, the concept of prison is used to hold somebody. The first case was about a man whose mother, her name was Shleimus Bas Divri, a whole story, now not time to get into it. Anyway, he was very upset at God, and therefore he actually cursed God. And the Jewish people didn't know what to do with him. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, lock him up, hold him for a short amount of time, till I consult with God what this person's punishment should be. So again, the imprisonment actually wasn't the punishment, it was just to hold him till the sentence could be carried out. A similar case is when somebody publicly desecrated the Shabbos in the desert, and they didn't know what to do with him. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu said to hold that person in confinement, temporary confinement, till God would tell Moshe Rabbeinu what the correct sentence would be. So again, all of these cases were either in contradiction with Jewish law or as a temporary situation to hold the person till we would find out what that person's sentence would be. It is mentioned in the Talmud, the concept of prison, in the context of locking away somebody who is dangerous, as we mentioned on Monday, somebody who is a danger to society. There it would actually make sense to confine them. There are, however, two cases in the Torah where it seems to be that we are using prison as a punishment, or taking away someone's freedom as a punishment. And the first case is slavery. As we learn in Parshas Mishpatim, Ki sikna eved ivri, when you acquire for yourself a Jewish slave. Now, what is it actually talking about? Many people say, Torah has the concept of slavery, that's evil, that's barbaric, but let's actually look in the context of how slavery was actually done, or why would a person eventually become a slave. They weren't kidnapped and made a slave. They were made a slave because they stole and they didn't have enough money to pay the person back. The way they would pay the person back would be to work for that person. So they would work for that person and thereby pay that person back the money that they stole. The slave would, just a couple of laws about this slavery, the slave would actually have to be treated properly. In fact, it says that the master would have to give the slave the same food that he ate. He would have to give him shelter, food, etc. Not only would he have to give him shelter and food, we have to give his wife and children food and shelter. So no, the person wasn't locked away from society with no contact with his wife and children. On the contrary, he was treated right. However, being punished because he stole and didn't have enough money to pay the person back. And actually, that makes a lot of sense. Again, the purpose of this shir is just to open up some thoughts, something to think about. You know, nowadays there's something called a white-collar crime, which means a non-violent criminal, somebody who has either stole money, especially fraud of the government. Now, of course, that's an evil thing. To steal money from anybody, including the government, is a terrible, terrible thing, and is a crime which needs to be punished. However, just think to yourself for a second, what is the point of locking away such a person for many years behind bars, where, number one, the person will not be able to be productive, and number two, they're not contributing anything to what they stole. They're not helping out the situation. How about maybe we should adopt, again, just something to think about, this concept of slavery in this context. Meaning, if somebody steals from the government, great idea. For the next 20 years, they will work for the government. They will do something. They wouldn't be allowed to work and make money, because obviously they can't be trusted with money, but let them contribute to society in a positive way. That number one, they'll be productive, and they will actually be making up what they lost. They'll pay back the one who they stole from. So of course it's a punishment. They are taking away certain freedoms from this person. They wouldn't be allowed to work, etc. But at least they'll be doing something productive. What is the point of the government paying for people to be in jail, which costs a tremendous amount of money, where, as we discussed last week, it doesn't even necessarily work. Once the person gets let out of jail, as we said, 60% of criminals are actually reoffenders. So why not, perhaps, maybe we should adopt this principle. It seems to be much more in accordance with human rights, and it seems to be much more productive and positive to the person which did the crime. He did a crime, needs to pay for it, needs to be punished, but why not do it in a productive way where both will gain, the victim and the perpetrator? And again, obviously, the purpose of here is punishment. He did something wrong, but again, he's still a human being, and therefore, if we are keeping that person alive, needs to do something productive. The second case in Torah where we see the concept of prison is Ir Miklat. Ir Miklat is the city of refuge. This would be if somebody killed somebody by accident, but it wasn't just by accident, like totally not that person's fault. In modern day terminology, that would be called manslaughter. They were negligent, they did something, they were on top of a tree, the classic example, they were holding an axe, They didn't think maybe someone would be passing by, maybe someone wouldn't be passing by. They dropped the axe and it hit someone's head, and unfortunately that person got killed. What would happen in such a case is Torah actually gave permission to the relatives of the person, it's called the Goyel Hadam, the redeemer of the blood, to actually take revenge, unless this person would run away to the city of refuge, be held in those 6 cities, 3 on one side of the Jordan, 3 on the other side, where a person would be safe from the relative's revenge, and they would have to stay there till the high priest died. Now, that sounds like prison, but it isn't. First of all, you need to understand it was a city. It wasn't a cell. They were able to walk around, they were able to work in the city, be productive, etc. Yes, they were confined to this one city, but it was a city. Number 2, what's important to understand is who actually lived in that city. The Levim, the Levites, didn't actually get a portion in the land of Israel. They lived in these cities. The Levim were holy people. So this was a city made up of people guilty of manslaughter and the most holiest people of the Jewish nation. What was the purpose of that? That they should actually affect these people. They should help them repent, help them heal. It was more of a rehabilitation center than a prison. In fact, the person was allowed to take with them their family, and not only that, but a teacher. Their spiritual mentor would be allowed to come with them. Again, the purpose of that is that yes, they need to be punished, they need an atonement, they need to be confined somewhere, but at least if we're keeping them alive, if we're saying that they've done something that's not so bad that they're allowed to be kept alive, then that means that they're still a human being who needs to be treated with dignity and therefore also be allowed to somehow fulfill their purpose of life. Take them to the city full of holy people. Hopefully they'll be affected. Let them take their family with them. And in that way they'll be punished. They're confined to one city. But on the other hand, they are also being productive at the same time. So to end this off, let's just put it this way. Of course, the best thing we have today is that we can come up with so far is the prison system. And of course, people which need to go to prison need to go to prison, and they should be in prison. But the purpose of this discussion was, first of all, that maybe perhaps we should think a little bit out of the box. And also to understand Torah's perspective in general. Just because someone did something wrong doesn't mean that they're not a human being anymore. Yes, they need to be punished for what they did, in some cases punished severely. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a purpose in life. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be productive. No matter what a person has done, they're still a human being. If we choose to keep that person alive. Yes, there are cases when someone who's done something so bad that they are guilty of the death sentence, again according to Torah. But if we're choosing to keeping them alive, that means they're still a human being who still have a purpose in their life. And perhaps, instead of focusing so much on prisons, maybe we should focus on more education, educating people in morality, educating people that there's something called right and there's something called wrong, and there's a God who watches them, whether they do something right or wrong. Hopefully, if we put focus on that, we'll raise a more moral generation, people which want to do the right thing, not because they might be punished if they don't, rather because they believe that they were born for a purpose and they should fulfill their purpose and therefore do the right thing. Have a great day.